Hey everybody, I'm Jack from Cytonox, and today I'll be ranking the bosses of Black Myth Wukong from worst to best. And what an incredible lineup! Not only are Black Myth Wukong's fights abundant in quantity, but their quality was unprecedented. That said, of the 102 total fights, I did omit a few and grouped others together. My rule was to discount any Yao Guai Chief enemy bosses, as in bosses who are simply stronger variants of lesser Yao Guai, and character bosses, most of which are reskins. I originally was going to ignore a lot more fights, like, say, Earthwolf, but I might as well speak my mind on them, even if I don't have much to say. Anyways, the bosses I'm specifically not including are Mother of Stones, Man in Stone, Yellow-Robed Squire, Chen Lung, Old Ginseng Guai, Monk from the Sea, Elder Armor Worm, Commander Beetle, Taoist Me because I missed him, Pale Axe Stalwart, Fungi Woman, Nine-Capped Ling Shi Guai, Fengtail General, and Son of Stones. I'm not evil enough to kill that thing, plus I saw a video of it, and if that's a boss, we start to go down a slippery slope. Though, if you guys would like my opinions on those fights, I guess I could write segments for them in a comment, so let me know. Secondly, the fights I'm grouping together are Frogs, Vanguards, the 4 element carts, and Chiefs. Lastly, this game has so many bosses, the vast majority of which are great, that this ranking is highly arbitrary. Don't take the individual numbers too harshly, but if you do disagree with one, comment why. Thank you to our patrons for your support, and stay tuned for your videos, which the both of us are working hard to finish soon. With all that said, let's get into the ranking. Number 69, Captain Lotus Vision. I could make a point for basically any other boss being at least decent, but Captain Lotus Vision is inexcusable. I wasn't fortunate enough to stumble upon this guy while I had the Pagoda Realm effect active, and the stress of having half my health made this experience even more miserable than it is otherwise. He just decided, hey, I'm gonna suck, and I'm like, no, why would you do that? The rest of this game's bosses are all fine. You're single-handedly preventing Wukong from having a perfect roster. If the introduction, as well as my well-acted argument trying to tell Captain Lotus Vision not to stink, didn't make it obvious enough, I love this game. Even though I had to delay this video by like 4 weeks because I got a ton of reading assignments in all my classes. I love everything about it, like how the developers weren't afraid to mess around with different types of bosses and combat mechanics. When experimenting, you're bound to make mistakes, and really, being a boss designer is an almost thankless job in that sense. The first thing people always remember is the giant turd, not the sculpted masterpiece. All that was to say, Captain Lotus Vision is very obviously an attempt to change the formula, and while I respect the idea, I don't like this boss that much. But he's the only fight in the whole game I outright dislike, so I wanted to take a moment to say great job to Game Science for making such amazing bosses. I'm not one of those people who complains just to complain, but here, well, I don't really know what else to do. What makes Captain Lotus Vision so frustrating is that he constantly warps away anytime you get within range to hit him. He is a stationary boss, but there could have been more creative measures taken in that sense, like giving him a bubble you break with a charged heavy attack, or even some sort of appendage that if you damage enough staggers him. Another problem I have, which is more so an issue with all magic-based bosses, is that they should have a mana meter too, or at least a cooldown. Especially this guy, by the way, he just doesn't stop. He's like if you give a dog who didn't get neutered a shot of pheromones. This is definitely a bigger problem in Souls-likes than it is anywhere else, and it's simply developer inexperience. That's not a diss, it's just a rather blunt observation that because the developers don't have the history, and perhaps even monetary funds that FromSoft has, the bosses they attempt to replicate often come out slightly less polished. But this game was by far the most overall complete Souls-like I've played. However, Wukong does suffer from the age-old unexplained mechanic, never more relevant than here. Lotus Vision has this crazy Ocean's 11 laser attack, which for whatever reason is only survivable by standing on top of an inconspicuous rock in the back of the room that's not even visible in the arena's lighting unless you stand on it. Stuff like that is what changes a boss from forgettable mediocre to memorable aggravating. While it's clear this boss isn't among the worst ever, I do think it's a point in my favor that if you look up Captain Lotus Vision, the first non-video link is a Reddit guide on how to cheese him. Number 68, Bat. This is a boss I think people might not like, but I'm also not sure because not that many people seem to even know he exists. Apparently, he's missable, and evidence is in that most of his guide videos have barely 1,000 views. I sacrificed minor spoilers by having a list to look at, and I still managed to miss Taoist Me, by the way. But I don't know anything about Journey to the West, so a lot of the names besides like Stone Monkey or Jubajie were pretty meaningless to me before I fought them, outside of being like, oh, that sounds cool. Bat was one of the many bosses that I first tried, but weirdly I feel like I need another attempt at him to garner a full opinion. He was constantly flying away and staying out of reach, which, like Captain Lotus Vision, makes me quite frustrated. You can't even finish a light combo here, and that gets frankly tiresome. I want to hit you. Let me hit you. The worst part was that at the end he flies away, so you don't even get the satisfaction of watching him get infinity gauntleted. Apparently he has multiple endings depending on when you fight him and what secrets in chapter 3 you've unlocked, but for all I know, he flew away and got hit by a plane or something. That's my headcanon. Number 67, Mother of Flamelings. I know I said I wouldn't count lesser Yao Guai bosses, but this is pretty discernible from the normal Flamelings. The mother is in the center, and her, I'll assume, kids surround her. Like the last two bosses, this can get fairly aggravating because you've got to kill the Flamelings to get Mom to come out. I'm starting to see a trend. In a game like this, where its most enticing sequences are combat, taking away the player's agency by moving bosses out of reach for prolonged periods is just not the way to go. It'd be like going to a restaurant where they let you eat the food, but every 15 seconds take it away and dangle it right in front of your face until they decide to let you sneak in another bite. Luckily, very few fights are offenders of this, but Mother of Flamelings is found guilty, charged with hiding for too long and making me wait in a game where I don't want to wait. Number 66, Earthwolf. This is a boss. Number 65, Father of Stones. If you couldn't tell from my in-depth analysis on Earthwolf, this stretch of bosses were the ones I was on the fence about even including. They offer little and kind of exist to fill up time, so I figured I'll give them the same treatment in my video for those succulent ad blocks. Father of Stones needed to be a part of this though. I couldn't let the Stones family go 0 for 3 on being too fraudulent to be considered bosses. You made it, pal. Number 64, Bolgard. This fight is so awesome, and Immobilize is a great feature. Subverting expectations by making the little old man pull off a trick like that never fails. The Keepers, by the way, were some of the best character designs, except for the one that tries to kill you. You're nothing compared to the Tengu bird guy, you piece of dick. Anyways, when I realized Bolgard was 10 seconds away from Guangxi, who was 10 seconds away from Wandering White, I knew I was in for a treat. Number 63, Chiefs. These guys are like stone taluses from Breath of the Wild if they were made from hard mud instead of rock, because they're easy. The Poison and Flint Chiefs, respectively, pose such little threat besides lava if you don't have body cooling powder that the devs decided to throw 4 of them in the last area for the f*** of it, I guess. I found one, and then another, and then another, and I was like, they've already hit maximum peak. There's no way there's another one. And then, boom! Guess what there was? Yep, another one. I actually did die to the first Poison Chief because the explosive balls do incredibly high damage, but I mean, you should be able to kill these guys in under 45 seconds, especially with endgame stats. Number 62, Non-Pure. Cool it, Baron Harkonnen. This guy is the most deceptive pushover in the entire game, especially given his name. My Wandering White Spirit and Unleveled Gong Shui transformation staggered him from 40% health to death in under 20 seconds. Number 61, Gore-Eye Taoist. Apparently this guy is the Lizan al-Gaib of this universe. The story, according to his journal entry, was that he was captured, released, gained a Great One sprout on his back, and turned a desolate mountain into a flourishing paradise, and then suddenly reverted it back to a wasteland. That's a lot of power in the hands of a mini-boss. Gore-Eye Taoist is mainly remarkable for his blood arts, a la the Thumerian Queen, plus the croakers in his arena. If you've watched this channel for long enough, you know that's one of my biggest pet peeves. but at least they put in the weakest enemies in the game, so I can somewhat discount it. This guy needs a one-way ticket to Yharnam, he'd fit right in. Number 60, non-white. Keeping up with everything else, even a blatant pushover still has amazing visual design. I'm not sure what it is, but the bosses telegraph their moves so well. It's not exactly easy to see, but it's not subtle either. There's also a bit of rhythm to the way they attack you, I noticed. Non-white is actually different from others due to a blocking meter, which once drained ends the first fight, and in the second, essentially does the same. It's nothing major, but it is unique. Number 59, Tiger's Acolyte. Now would be a good time to bring up how often I died during great attempts. I was perfect in my first fight with Tiger's Acolyte, but got killed when he was one shot because he knocked me off the bridge. Against the Great Sage's Broken Shell, I got immobilized during a gourd sip while he was low, and I died. In the secret final boss, I beat Erlong, the 4 Heavenly Kings, and had Erlong Shen low, but died to a single combo. Though Tiger's Acolyte isn't even in the same galaxy as the latter two, dying during a quality attempt is universally disheartening. Not to mention, at least in this case, undeserving. As the story goes, Tiger's Acolyte was a normal man whose wife and son fell ill as a result of the Yellow Wind Sage's Samadhi Wind, and got reduced by the Mad Tiger, wherein he lost his mind and both slaughtered his village and beat his son to death. Much like Osiris in his more animalistic state, Tiger's Acolyte still cares immensely for his child, but to back him, at least his son is real. Number 58, 5 element carts. If these guys weren't carts, I probably wouldn't count them. Functionally, each acts the same, but as you progress, the spaces where you fight them grow accordingly, from a narrow road to a volcanic crater. It's an inventive way to make the same exact boss feel like 4 unique encounters, and highlights the importance of spatial design. Can't hate the cart. Number 57, Giant Shigandang. While an incredible set piece, that's all he really is. You could make the argument that this is inherently no different than Fengtail General, but Shigandang requires at least a bit of decision making over following a script. You can fall victim to ego and get smashed to death if you get too close, selfishly assuming you could actually damage it, but this fight works similar to the mausoleums in Elden Ring. Once he tires out after moving, like, once, he'll keep his arms out in prostrate position and you break his ingrown crystals on the end of his hand. When Alex and I were texting after I beat Erlong Shen, I said that if there was a game with Wukong's combat and Asura's Wrath's QTEs and set pieces, it would be perfect. I'm not sure why QuickTime events were brushed aside by the industry, because I think they allow for much more creativity and action, and specifically boss fights, as they're not limited by mechanical constraints, and Giant Shigandang is a great example of a boss that would have benefited immensely from a grandiose QTE sequence. Due to having to work within the confines of generic combat, however, he's a fairly tame, even underwhelming boss, considering he is a mountain. Number 56, Yellow Lung. This is an extremely controversial boss, and I'm not the biggest fan of him. On the one hand, he is very obviously meant to be fought later rather than immediately after finding the Keeper Shrine he's next to, but to that point, why scale him that way? I'm not against difficulty at all, but this comes across as artificial challenge via statistical imbalancing. He's necessary for the Supreme Gourd Quest too, and while I'm not sure if that's missable or not, it does give you maybe the best item in the whole game, so for all intents and purposes, everything points you towards fighting him as soon as you find him. Yellow Lung's biggest pitfall, excluding the aforementioned stat imbalance, is his hyper-aggressive moveset, which by the end of Phase 2 offers practically no reprieve outside of Immobilize or Cloud Step. And even then, he has the ability to see through Cloud Step and attack you. I also don't appreciate how his slice move he uses to begin Phase 2 has varied timings. Minor details like that shift the boss from mild to extreme on the Scoville scale of difficulty, and once again, not in a natural way. This is also a complete system shock in the sense of it being an actual challenge able to hold the mantle of the Souls bosses. I'd say with a heavy focus on mana, transformations, Immobilize, and Pluck of Many, you can first try just about any boss in this game, but not Yellow Lung. He is a different level compared to the rest, which makes him equally aggravating, yet admittedly rewarding. If his overall skill level was toned down just slightly, I could see this placing among the elites. Number 55. Frogs. The recurring frogs are probably the least dislikable bosses ever. Ba li ge lang, lang li ge ba, lang li ge lang, ba li ge ba. Number 54. Guangxi. After dancing around Bolgard, Guangxi is the first real test of metal. It should come as no surprise that he's not much beyond the flashy staff and combos, but it is interesting seeing him in retrospect from the point of view of the many bosses slain using his transformation. Number 53. Captain Calpawave. Straight from the Atomic Heart scrapyard, Captain Calpawave is a cool visual but fights like a coordinated last giant. Some of Wukong's bosses had weak points, and I think this is a boss that should have had one too. Not anything to cry home about, but decently fun. Number 52. Zhao Lung of Waves. With the mad boss rush that is Chapter 6, having the pool muddled by unconvincing mini-bosses made it less exciting. That's not to say Zhao Lung is bad at all, he's just definitely not up to the standard of Mount Huaguo, and because of the all-star lineup he's surrounded by, he falls a tad flat. And by the way, if you think Chen Lung should have qualified, well, you're right. I'd say he's like the next evolution of this boss. I just made the point of no character bosses for the sake of consistency. But I did count Mother of Flamelings. Hold on. Number 51.5, Chen Lung. One of the nicest characters in the game, and boy did I feel like an asshole after beating him to a pulp. I find it interesting how spacious his arena is, and I believe that was a very purposeful decision. In a tighter room, I could see this fight being easily frustrating, but as is, he's a genuinely enjoyable mini-boss with unique special moves, and once again, is a cool old dude. Number 51, First Prince of Flowing Sands. For anybody who speaks Mandarin, I apologize if the Hanzi are wrong. English to Chinese is a rough translation, so when I tried to make the words flowing sands, it would become quicksand. Although, maybe that is the direct translation, and quicksand in Mandarin becomes flowing sands in English. Anyways, this plus-sized rat was once a great human warrior. It wasn't until the arrival of the Yellow Wind Sage that the citizens of Sandgate Village and its royal family were transformed into rodentia, and in the case of the first prince, devolving from a wartime hero to a patricidal rat. To be honest, this fight doesn't really offer much, and surprisingly so considering it is the follow-up to a seemingly high-stakes gank with differing outcomes depending on who you kill. Well, it would have been a high-stakes gank, but that's more a criticism of the King of Flowing Sands. Ultimately, you either fight the first prince using meat to lure him out, or let his father serve himself as a midday snack. To elaborate on my point about the King of Flowing Sands fight, it's conceptually good, but I think it would have been significantly better if the first rat prince was also affected by the outcome of the gank, like, say, the pungent flesh chunk could serve as bane juice and turn him into a roided out royal rat vanguard. As is, this is just a nice and simple fight. Number 50, Buddha's Right Hand. Because I come from a more Christian knowledge base compared to other religions, I was shocked at how often the Buddha's name was attached to things in this game. But in this case, the Buddha's right hand is antithetical. As its journal entry goes, the hand that plucked lotus from waters pristine, of the same species, yet not from the same egg, it seems. And if you keep reading, it explains how the 100-eyed Taoist master placed an egg in the hand, sprouting a vile insect. It's an extremely unique encounter, with two distinct phases in a narrow arena that truly cements this as one of the most peculiar boss fights I've gone through in my years of YouTube rankings. The reason I put it at number 50 is because it takes a long time to beat, as the hand, plus the bug, constantly shift location, leaving you on a wild goose chase until Immobilize recharges. The second phase is a bit easier to handle, even if still a tad aggravating, but overall this fight's unique qualities make it stand out. Number 49. Non-Void. The heartless acolyte of Yellowbrow is much like an anti-Scrooge, with comparative confrontations by the spirits of their lives' past crimes. Instead of turning a new leaf, however, Non-Void decides, I'm gonna kill you again, to the infant fox he murdered and used as a scarf after a lucid nightmare. Non-Void moves very mysteriously, and is also much taller than his age and the cutscene would suggest. I'll admit with no shame that he kicked my ass, and if it wasn't for my 10-year-old coconut wine, I would have been dead quicker than he could say animal rights. Number 48. Macaque Chief. I haven't seen whether people count this as a single entry or not, but in my mind, it is the exact same boss, just fought 3 separate times. Macaque Chief was formerly a military leader under son Wukong, but was recruited by Yellowbrow to govern New Thunderclap Temple after the Great Sage's death. Macaque Chief being mute and generally unintelligent makes him one of the most endearing bosses in the game. You almost want to root for him, especially when you find out he's essentially Yellowbrow's slave. Macaque Chief is the first boss you interact with in the New West, then reappears attempting to kill the old man, and then again once you and Shu get absorbed by Yellowbrow's sack. The fight itself is akin to a larger enemy from Souls 3 or Elden Ring, but I personally think the best part of Macaque Chief is when you get to play as him after his Yellowbrow fight. Still, his recurring presence in Chapter 3 as a boss was pleasant. Number 47. Kang Jin Lung. Another highly contentious boss I felt safe placing generally near the bottom. Half of me believes she has great potential, the other cannot stand the camera and frustrations of her flying out of reach for multiple minutes of fight. Alex recently brought this up while discussing Black Dragon Calamite in our Souls ranking, where he made the point that Calamite, relative to other dragon bosses who we ranked lower than him, is starkly different and frankly better in that he rarely leaves the ground. It's only on major attacks that he does, whereas a boss like Kang Jin Lung does the polar opposite. The camera is another problem, but I'll make the case that it's 2 sides of the same coin. If she wouldn't fly as high as she did, then she would be in frame, simple as. However, the lock-on system is the real silent killer. 1, it doesn't track motion, and 2, it establishes awkward hitboxes that you end up whiffing at due to her slim frame. I actually wasn't as aggravated by Kang Jin Lung as seemingly a lot of people were, but that's not to say she's good. I think, like basically every boss so far besides Captain Lotus Vision, that she's around a 6.5 out of 10 on a scale, but my biggest takeaway was that she could have been so much better. Number 46. Vanguards. Stone Vanguard on his own was a shocking challenge and a fun boss, but his, I guess, aura drops significantly with the addition of Flint Vanguard, who retroactively takes away the novelty of the original and reduces their combined quality by the nature of being a reskin, and more so by being a fight supplemented by lesser Yao Guai. It's a little bit unfair to discredit Stone Vanguard for a reskinned optional mini-boss found in the late game, but well, honestly, I don't have a rebuttal. Like I said, this list is extremely arbitrary, and in my mind, it's impossible to picture Stone Vanguard alone because his image was ruined by the flaming reskin that's in the game to be fought. While his moveset isn't very expansive, it forces you to be dynamic by running out of the AoE's range, which makes it feel much more alive than a generic attack you roll through. He has a ton of health too, and killing him felt like a milestone in that regard. Number 45. The Second Sister. Sometimes things aren't as they seem. If I lived in a fictional universe, I'd stay away from even remotely attractive women. It's almost cliche, well, it actually is cliche, how often they transform into some grotesque monster when the time's right. The Second Sister is a simplistic boss who would benefit from her abdomen being a weak spot. She's a cool introduction to Webbed Hollow. Number 44. Ling Zhishi. The first Yao Guai King is an interesting one. Due to my general lack of story knowledge during Chapter 1, I remember somebody was being built up as this great fearsome enemy, but I can't remember if it was Ling Zhishi or the Black Wind King they were referring to. I beat Ling Zhishi first try, and because of the hype, or the hype I think was about him, I felt underwhelmed by his difficulty, though at the same time, he was awesome. The Great Wolf is quite comparable to Bloodborne's Vicar Amelia in a multitude of ways, beyond being the first beast boss of their respective games. Ling Zhishi emphasized the importance of transformations and the elemental damage they inflict, in Guangxi's case, fire. The fight evolves minorly with the rooftop attack, but for what it's worth, Ling Zhishi is an intimidating spectacle that's all bark and a little bite. Number 43. Gangme. Or, as Google Docs keeps telling me to call him, Gangshe. It's not a city, it's a Yaoguai chief in Black Myth Wukong, Google. When I found Gangme, I was impressed. Mostly by his visual design. Game Science did an incredible job making the human characters so distinct. Not one person looks alike, which in a world of increasing creative bankruptcy is hard to come by. Gangmu's fight was also unique, and I had a pretty good time. I'm not the biggest fan of projectiles, and the second phase is a huge proponent of them, but in this game's combat system, they're a bit easier to dodge than in the FromSoft engine, so I don't mind them as much. He was the first boss besides Wandering White to kill me, so props. Number 42, White-Clad Noble. A surprise character boss is the last fight I'd expect to introduce multiple health bars. If Game Science are to make another Wukong type game, I'd hope they have more multi-phase bosses and give fights more complex evolutions, perhaps at the cost of quantity. White-Clad Noble is a thrilling encounter, and is what my imagined Yellow Loon V2 would somewhat be like. Not too difficult, not too tanky, but able to pose a threat and exceptionally fun to dodge. Number 41, Erlang the Sacred Divinity. I've fought so many introductory bosses at this point that I'd like to think I have an enlightened palate. In my mind, Erlang the Sacred Divinity is nearly perfect in what he aims to be. In this introduction, you don't play as the Destined One, instead, the real Sun Wukong in his fabled attempt to destroy the Celestial Court. Once the fight begins, the combat options are practically endless, with the ability to do essentially whatever you want, and without the stress of a health or mana bar. You're the Monkey King. Sure, freeze your enemy in midair, or spawn a dozen clones, all while being watched by the celestial protectors of the Earth. Purely on spectacle alone, this is a solid entry, but the gameplay is so fun that this nearly places in the middle of the ranking. No small feat for a no-stakes introduction. Number 40, Centipede Guai. I like this boss, even though he's more of a decipede. It'd be nice if he smashed into a wall by rolling too fast. Number 39, Black Wind King. Visually, Black Wind King is reminiscent of Resident Evil 6's Derek Simmons. It's hard to put into words without sounding like Dahmer, but the texture of their skin is just so appealing. Because this is his weaker human form, the fight isn't very complex, but it is entertaining. I just wish he did that smoke sequence a little less. Number 38, Green-Capped Martialist. What goes around comes around. After playing the Destined One like a fiddle, the treasure hunter spawns in the Child's Melon Field, revealing himself to be a Yaoguai chief. This is a very dynamic encounter, but the downtime segments where he spins around General Grievous style drag this out far longer than I'd like them to. However, the second half's combos save it from being an outright boring fight. I've said it a bunch of times and I'm going to say it again, this is as discretionary a ranking I've ever made before, but I still have somewhat of an order in my head. I think I put this a little too high, but Green-Capped Martialist is still a fun boss. Number 37, King of Flowing Sands and Second Rat Prince. Ornstein and Smo, you've been topped. Nah, just kidding. This undoubtedly takes inspiration from the Golden Boys of Anor Londo, but what it fails in replicating is impacting the second phase and beyond. Whether you kill the king or the prince, you'll get the same weapon upgrade slop, and at least with one of the two outcomes, an abrupt end without a second phase. Realistically, the king is bait, as he has an extremely small health bar and the most he can do is toss a pile of dirt, or maybe even leading the average player into thinking they should kill the easier target. But the second prince is already fairly difficult, and I'd imagine the souped up version would logically be harder. Like I said earlier, the choice would feel much more consequential if it also affected the first rat prince, or even just had a more emphatic phase evolution with either the king or the prince, but because both roads lead to the same exit, I'd recommend going with the easier option. Number 36, Tiger Vanguard. I tried to make it sound like it was in quotes. The father of Mad Tiger and the new Tiger Vanguard may be an old dog, but he can still move. I've always appreciated the older sensei type characters in the sense that even in their elderly state, there's still no pushover. Tiger Vanguard is an all-out brawl, and he attacks with such ferocity. He's also an honorable warrior, and in a game full of mindless demons and generally shitty people, that's a respectable trait. Much the opposite to green-capped martialist, I think this should maybe be a bit higher up the list. Number 35, Venom Taoist. Non-white, but non-mediocre. Venom Taoist is one of the few bosses who you encounter multiple times within a chapter, in this case, the Webbed Hollow. You first find him trapped in a cocoon, which after you turn into a birthday piñata reveals Darkskin Asura, trained by the 100-eyed Taoist master. Venom Taoist made it his life's quest to evolve his body, and by the time we find him, his transformation is nearly complete. Of all the possible things you could do in this universe, making it your death wish to have a bunch of arms and look cool is a very admirable self-journey to take up. He could have been one of those people who wanted to, like, massacre a city or something, so I respect what he's doing, and I see the vision. It's like being a Bogdanov, but way cooler. Unfortunately, after the first fight, we piss all over his parade and cut off 6 of his 8 arms, and by the end of phase 1 in the second fight, all extra appendages are off. Interestingly, in his presumably weakest state, he's the most aggressive and enjoyable. I do think for a humanoid boss, he's fairly tame and doesn't really offer much in terms of unique qualities, but Venom Taoist is overall quick, dangerous, and fun, a solid triumvirate of attributes. Number 34, Cyan Lung. An optional, secret Yao Guai King, this guy's about as secret as a Marvel project. When you walk up to Kangjin Star, you'll care to notice a giant circular space about 10 seconds, well, okay, not giant, but decently large circular space about 10 seconds to her right, wherein an unremarkable, bite-sized dragon is staring off into the ocean. Don't be fooled by his measly appearance, however. This is one of Wukong's most dangerous bosses. Cyan Lung has quite possibly the highest damage output in the entire game, relatively speaking. Shock resistance can help deter that, but I naively figured I could go without any powder and was promptly decimated for about an hour. Number 33, Non-Able. I'll promote him to Able. He kicked the shit out of me. Literally. This is like a much more enjoyable chained ogre, with the bonus of another phase where he frees his arms and gets surprisingly easier. I struggled a lot more trying to read his kneecaps than his shoulders. Number 32, Shigandang. Another living rock, but this time with a face. Shigandang is the second or third, depending on when you fought Red Lung, of many secret Yao Guai kings. A big reason why I like him is the way he looks, plus the AoEs. A handyman came to check out my place's dishwasher while I was fighting Shigandang, but luckily I was able to pause the game and come back to kill him. By the way, the guy told us nothing was wrong, even though we showed him something was wrong, after he'd already been here to tell us nothing was wrong, after we showed him something was wrong. Number 31, Waterwood Beast. I got the Yao Guai Chief entry from killing one of the enemy variants, so I wasn't expecting a boss to show up, much less from knee-height water. Waterwood's Beast's main flaw is the mini whirlpools, which slow you down to a practical halt and exist to simply enhance the fight's difficulty. It also lasts a bit long with his second phase antics, but I still had a good time. Number 30, Mad Tiger. The crazy forgotten brother stuck in an abandoned well. We've all seen it. Mad Tiger is a terrifying fight because you probably spent the hour before him getting your asshole crammed inside your asshole by his, at least visually, even crazier looking brother. Mad Tiger isn't nearly as difficult as Tiger Vanguard, but he is still electric. He was also one of the main players in Sandgate Village's demise, to put it lightly, failing to kill Yellow Windsage and later seducing Tiger's acolyte. After Tiger's acolyte killed his son and the rest of the village, Mad Tiger took the boy's coffin into his well and began training to assassinate Yellow Windsage, which is why you receive the old rattle drum after killing Tiger's acolyte, an item you use to summon the spirit of his son, who leads you to Mad Tiger's well. His unibrow and untrimmed whiskers really sell the whole mole person thing. Number 29, Bishui Golden-Eyed Beast. By the endgame, I felt that transformations and Pluck of Many were too overpowered, so I refrained from using them, with the exception of bosses who get off a cheap shot. Bishui Golden-Eyed Beast screwed himself by jumping right into the fight from a cutscene, which if I was a bit more aware and dodged, I'd probably be praising. This boss's fight comp to me is Manus, but if Manus moved as fast as he feels like he does. Because the rest of Dark Souls is so slow, Manus is comparatively lightning fast, but realistically he's no quicker than Fume Knight or another fast-ish Souls 2 boss. Bishui Golden-Eyed Beast, however, really is that fast, and has the bonus of both elemental damage and an arena where half of it is an environmental hazard. That is, if you do what I did and only fought him in the main arena. You can actually bait the beast into breaking an ice wall, which sends you into a whole new area where his moveset changes to frost and apparently gets much easier. If you don't do that, he's a fight you're probably best off saving for later rather than going for it immediately after unlocking him, but it does feel right killing the Bull King's pet after freeing him of the burden that was his son, Red Boy. Number 28, Wandering White. I wonder what you guys think of this. I personally quite like Wandering White despite his middle of the pack placement, but it seems based on comments I've seen that people generally view this as frustrating. I never really got too upset during this, but I also didn't typically ever get annoyed while playing this game outside of the Pagoda realm. That's not to argue Wandering White doesn't have frustrating attributes, however. He is unreasonably hard for early game, or rather, is perhaps intentionally made to be an extreme challenge that tests the Souls player's resolve and ego by kicking your shit in the image of how Margit or the Bell Gargoyles did to us when we first played those games. His one vice is having some of the most unclear hitboxes I've ever seen before, but his sorcery moves can also be avoided by just not standing in mid to long range. Compared to Guangxi and Bulgard, Wandering White requires much more patience and a general tone down in greed. I said Cyan Lung was the most punishing fight, but if not him, then it's this, which is why I had so much fun. He's a blast to fight because he is so dangerous, and I have to admit a big reason why I like this boss, beyond the feeling of toying with death, is the way he looks. That's probably a trend you've noticed, but I often rate fights subconsciously on if they look cool or not. Ignoring his exterior appearance, however, Wandering White's severe challenge makes his defeat worthwhile, and either way I did have a good time and appreciate his moveset, whether or not others feel the same. Number 27, Violet Spider. This Yaoguai queen is definitely one thing, a spider, but I don't know about Violet. Maybe Scarlet? Zhu Bajie's lover is a cool boss, and while a redundant compliment, that's the most apt description I can give for a lot of these. Number 26, Fuban. I actually had no idea the person you beat Fuban with was the Yellow Wind Sage, who, in his defense, did a mighty good job at being a badass and seemingly a pretty good dude. He summons Fuban Dune style and joins in to help defeat it after he snags a seemingly insipid Buddha bust from its back after phase 1. Little did I know that that giant stone bust was the literal head of the headless monk, previously known as Bodhisattva Lingji, whose head's power prevented the sage from damaging Fuban, in turn preventing the sage from using his Samadhi wind to his full potential, meaning Fuban is actually on your side, but in the moment I just assumed it was some innocuous MacGuffin to move the story forward. Which I guess you could argue it is on a surface level. Fuban is actually a tame boss functionally, and his biggest positives are the spectacle and lore. Him being a good guy after the fact makes this much better, but that's not to say he isn't already a good time. Number 25, Cloudy Mist, Misty Cloud. This game gets pretty creative with its ganks. Cloudy Mist, Misty Cloud is like the Demon Prince's first phase, if each prince flew into the air when they ran out of energy rather than standing around. Cloudy Mist is the combined form of 3 clumsy ghosts who aspired to become mountain deities. After failing to assassinate Misty Cloud, the blind god of the flaming mountains, the ghosts and deity were forcibly made into a team when surprise attacked by Red Boy, who appointed them as protectors of the mountain. The two forms swap in and out, but you'll progressively chip away at each at around the same amounts, until you kill one, leaving the other to their own devices. It plays out well and feels unique. Number 24, Cloud Treading Deer. As one of the main Mount Huaguo bosses hiding Wukong's relics, this was bound to be legit. Cloud Treading Deer does a good job as the follow-up to Supreme Inspector and Gold Armored Rhino, but he's just a bit easy. The tornadoes aren't my favorite mechanic, but I still like the second phase. I just think this boss needs to do more to really stand out. Number 23, Captain Wise Voice. Yes, I'm a fan of weak points if you couldn't tell. Weak points are very efficient with giving a boss, at least on a base level, an original feel. I find that they create a tangible goal that adds a layer of complexity beyond the basic task of reducing their health bar, and it also comes with the bonus of satisfying extra damage. No better example than Captain Wise Voice. After dealing enough poise to his ankles, he'll drop to the ground, wherein his head takes heavily increased damage. I'm pretty certain that Wise Voice introduces the charge heavy attack stagger mechanic Yellowbrow and other bosses afterwards also have, so there's another point in his favor. But because this boss isn't necessarily as deadly as, say, Yellowbrow, I'd recommend sticking with light attack combos to knock him down, and unleashing a heavy attack and Gwai Spirit on his head. Captain Wise Voice is pretty easy, pretty fun, and has the shock addition of a crazy attack. Number 22, Yin Tiger. Not only does Yin Tiger look great, he sounds great. His voice mixing takes me back to 2008 Demon Souls. It's a phenomenal choice and gives his character grit. As if he needed any more. This fight is insanely difficult. He teleports, is generally hyper fast, and has so many variations of combos, heavy attacks, and basic sideways swings. Yin Tiger is the type of character I'd want to play as in a spin-off. Number 21, 100-Eyed Taoist Master. Yup. The second phase. It's a very unnecessary mechanic, and considering the Weaver's Needle prevents him from transitioning anyways, I think it should have just been a cutscene, or, like I said in Giant Shigandong's segment, a quick time. His phase 1 is really cool, but I'd rather it restart with the Spider Sisters alive instead of taking out a chunk of his health and facing him alone. He's a pretty good chapter finale with a great name and amazing lore, but I do think this is a fight that could have gone without the added layers. As much as I appreciate the concept of the sneak second phase, it's a really awkward, poorly introduced, or really unintroduced feature that can totally screw you over because it's never outright explained. I'm on the train of thought of, at least you can avoid that second phase, because otherwise this would be right up there next to Lotus Vision. Number 20, Supreme Inspector. Let's tackle the elephant in the room. What's up with his skin? Does he have sclerosis? Nah, the reason Supreme Inspector has a hand for a head is because the Jade Emperor decided to transform him into his own hand for the message of the Inspector's presence essentially being his presence by extension. Some theorize that the Inspector accepted this transformation as a trade-off for status, while others believe he's simply antisocial. I prefer the latter. Supreme Inspector is a perfect introduction to Chapter 6, what is essentially a glorified boss rush. He's got a healthy dose of red lightning, which is pretty much anti-bad boss serum, and the fight evolves exceptionally well, with a ring of fire closing you in at the end, another feature you can't really go wrong with. Number 19, Red Lung. I had to look up a guide for this boss, which I never do, because I couldn't fathom a fight having that much health so early in the game. It was only thanks to IGN that I found out the giant, bubbling, obvious electric balls on his back actually explode if you damage them enough. I guess I figured this game didn't have a weak point system because some of the larger fights didn't take head damage, so I thought it was a universal design. Once you figure that out, Red Loon gets a lot better. I like the Dark Beast Parl trick he pulls by releasing an AoE when he recovers, and his general movement is, compared to the other traditional dragon, much more manageable. He has pretty low poise as well, and the balls do about a quarter health per explosion, so this ends up being a really fun gimmick rather than the freak of nature his health bar makes him appear to be. Number 18, the Scorpion Lord. Guy just wants to get drunk, and I can't blame him. If I was one of 20 people on the planet who could still communicate with words, and like one of 3 that wasn't an incredible douchebag, I'd probably drink all day long too. Scorpion Lord's combos last a while, but I was able to beat him first try. Number 17, Emerald Armed Mantis. Watching this guy slice up Shu's belly was like peeling off a toenail. And what's this guy's problem anyways? You're the one that jumped in his mouth. He didn't make you let yourself get eaten or whatever. I definitely think they could have done some stomach acid environmental trap thing, or at least a falling down through the throat quick time, if those were still a thing. The Emerald Armed Mantis is a hellbent motherfucker and doesn't quit. Until I made him quit. Number 16, top takes bottom, bottom takes top.
Ain't that the truth?
Yeah, I think this one is my biggest oversight. These guys are a fun gank, but they get very repetitive because of their Looking Glass Knight shields that make 3/4 of their hitbox undamageable. It's a cool mechanic at first, but after a while you just wish they'd drop them, or they'd break, or they just stop hiding so much. The idea is cool, but the shields belabor this significantly. If they were less defensive, this would be much more engaging. Number 15, Zhu Bajie. I was just hoping he wasn't gonna die. What if he did die? Then we'd be the ones swallowing that mantis. Shu grew on me with each chapter. Webbed Hollow was the deep character study arc of his story, and it worked because, as a character, he's a phenomenal mix of comedy, clumsiness, power, all with a layer of sorrow. He's a good midway between Bluto Blatarsky and Stanchik. His fight, like Macaque Chief, is actually 3 fights. The first is an intentionally goofy mind control freak you'll beat in a minute, but soon after, you'll find him again and much larger. I found the second phase as easy as the first, he just had a little more power behind his swings. But once you get him to half health, he transforms into his boar form, and this is where things really kick off. In this third phase, he can morph between a mud creature and the boar, and though I do think the fish segments last too long and don't offer enough opportunities for damage, the boar makes up lost ground. I also do like the way he looks. He reminds me of Motley Boss Blob from Mario 3D World. Zhu Bajie was intense and long, but like I said, I'm just happy he lives. Number 14, Gold Armored Rhino. This is essentially a way better Bishui Goldenite Beast. Possibly contrary to public opinion, I really enjoyed the charged heavy stagger mechanic. It's really satisfying knocking off the Rhino's horn, but you also don't necessarily have to. I found success hovering around his anus, and tried rotating with him when he'd flip around to protect himself. Great follow-up to Supreme Inspector. Number 13, Kangjin Star. This fight was intimidating as hell, maybe because she summons a city-sized turtle, and a dragon, and is a blank-faced Snow White woman all alone on said turtle in front of apparently important bells related to son Wukong. At least the Turtle General is a good guy, they made all the right characters Wukong's friends. Anyways, Kangjin Star is a pretty awesome fight, even though she summons the not-so-awesome Kangjin Loon. I guess the Turtle General gives everyone a 900% health buff or something, because both Kangjin Star and Cyan Loon ridiculously outlevel whatever type of stats you have in mid-chapter 3. This fight is a bit less extreme than her subtractively colored half-brother with regards to damage, but is definitely no pushover. She'll spend a large portion of the fight floating in the air, and yes, while I said I don't like that, and I don't, she's very punishable when she's on the ground, and those air sequences are quite engaging, a far cry from the likes of Opera Mana Bat, who simply floats around to do nothing. Those fights just sort of waste your time and don't try to kill you, but at least here she makes an effort. And a great effort, by the way. I like this fight a lot, but I'm curious if the rest of you guys also do. Number 12, Yellow Wind Sage. I know Alex isn't a big fan of Yellow Wind Sage, but I happy-go-lucky first tried him, and now that I know the full Wukong lore, man am I proud of that performance. This is a nutso boss who quite literally cannot stop attacking, but I guess that's part of the fun. Maybe a bit too high in this ranking, but it's also a crazy end to a crazy chapter, so who really cares? Number 11, Tiger Vanguard. This is my favorite looking boss I can remember. The whole picture is just amazing, especially his eyes and the arena. For once, a boss I visually love is also on par with its gameplay. Tiger Vanguard is an ass kicker more than he is a Vanguard, but Vanguard sounds cooler and is theoretically synonymous. He's this game's Ornstein and Smo if Wandering Light was Bell Gargoyles, if you wanted another Dark Souls comparison. If you didn't want another Dark Souls comparison, then don't rewind, because it already happened. And by that comparison, I mean that in him being a wall. I managed to kill this dude in about 45 minutes, but I've heard of some multi-hour horror stories, which doesn't come as much of a surprise. Tiger Vanguard is a hyper-aggressive boss who punishes mistimed rolls severely, most notably with his rock-solid attack and dash. Perfect dodging him takes me right back to Sekiro, which takes me right back to remembering how comparatively horrible I am at both games to Ongball. No damaging this boss would be a proud moment for me. What a fight. Number 10, Elder Jinshi. The disparity between Wandering White and Elder Jinshi's placements might cause some uproar, but beyond the visual level, these bosses are functionally much different. Elder Jinshi, not only being one of the more interesting bosses in his novelty as the game's first secret fight, is an incredible visual experience and a masterpiece of boss evolution. Yes, intrinsically he and Wandering White share attacks, but he expands the moveset greatly. But that's also not really why I placed him here. It's things like the corpse guys healing you when you kill them, and the healing phase you can mitigate by killing the corpses that make this stand out so much. He's just fun as hell. I had a blast fighting Elder Jinshi, and I'll always look forward to him on future playthroughs. Number 9. Black Bear Guai. The Black Wind King's final form is great, but he's not better than the last few, in all honesty. I would truthfully move him back, but those title cards took me so long to make that I'd be sacrificing much more time backtracking than I would just admitting I made a mistake. Black Bear Guai is still awesome though. He feels like the most climactic of any chapter finale to me, excusing chapter 6, mostly due to his arena. A giant flaming ring is a pretty safe way to mark the end of something. I don't know about it. Maybe more like giant flaming rings are a pretty safe way to make something appear cool? Whatever effect the flaming ring has, because I clearly don't know. It works because Black Bear Guai is just a straight up great boss. He's a bit vanilla once you fight everyone else, but that isn't to deter him. For the first final boss, he's fantastic. Number 8. Quick as fire, fast as wind. As I've said a few times already, this is a creative boss, but of every boss I've ever fought, this has to be in the top 5 most unique. 2 Olmec heads that flop around for long enough for pasta to cook al dente somehow make for one of the most compelling fights in a game with tiger warriors, dragons, and living mountains. With this, I hereby honor game science with a black belt for mastery in the discipline of gank design, while I half-assedly claim top takes bottom rivals Ornstein and Smo. Wait, I messed that up. I think it was King of Flowing Sands. But either way, there is a legitimate comparison there, at least functionally. Black Myth Wukong made a point of gank bosses never attacking you at the same time, which is the universal reason behind most bad gank bosses being bad. While it does drag out a fight, especially here when Fast as Wind is unhittable until it swoops down, it's combated by a weaker health pool and engaging movesets in which both Quick as Fire and his floating head in Crime combine for larger moves, mixing wind and fire. I was trying to figure out a way to do some sort of earth, wind, and fire joke, but that would have been so weak and on the nose, so I'm gonna scrap it. But even though this boss took me 7 minutes to beat, it kept me fully engaged, and I hope others appreciate this as much as I do. Number 7. Black Lung. Uh-oh. Before you get mad at me, I also hate the slam attack, even though I think it's really cool. When's the last time a boss attacked to the beat of its theme? FromSoft are the masters of crescendos, Bale or Soul of Cinder come to mind, but this was really unique. It's also really freaking annoying. I died while standing on the rocks because the hitboxes are bullshit. When it works, it's awesome, but don't get caught in a transformation when he starts it. You can't jump. Outside of that one move, I truly think this is an exhilarating fight. Black Lung is hard AF, but incredibly rewarding to beat. He has a really unique style of movement and his weapons are fantastic. Can't say I'm a diehard fan, but if the beat move was just slightly adjusted, this has a case for cracking the top 5 in my opinion. Number 6. Yellowbrow. Question for everybody, would you consider this a boss or a cinematic event? 25 minutes of straight combat seems like a daunting task, but Yellowbrow is a great example of interweaving gameplay and cutscenes. All he's missing is a quick time. In his sack, and no, not the sack you're thinking of. His sucky sack. Wait a minute. Yellowbrow is next in this game's lineage of just horrible people after Yellow Windsage, but for me falls just short of Red Boy, who's also the devil, by the way. Now that I think about it, this game did an amazing job making all of the final bosses, besides Sun Wukong, be as evil as possible. Yellowbrow's first phase is pretty easy, and because he moves so slow, he's quite punishable. Once you defeat him, he absorbs you in his evil sack, wherein you discover the Macaque Chief. Since I already covered him earlier, just know it's the same as the last two encounters, but this time you're rewarded with his spirit, in which you take his form and claw through Yellowbrow's collection of absorbed creatures and ghouls. One thing I'll never understand with characters like this, or Mad Hatter, or Mysterio is, if you're able to be inside someone's mind, or even better, have someone trapped in your mind, and can make yourself that big, why would you shrink yourself down to normal size and try fighting your captive after you already gotten beat before? If I was Yellowbrow, I'd keep doing that weird staring thing if I was, the size of a tower, and laugh at the fact that I literally control that person. But Yellowbrow is Yellowbrow, and Yellowbrow is evidently an idiot. But it's also hard being as intelligent as someone so enlightened like me. But yeah, Phase 3 is hard. I struggled immensely because I didn't fully understand his rock-solid mechanic until after multiple failed attempts. Keep in mind, I'm extremely enlightened like I just said, but even excusing that, he has 2 transitions that take away half your health, his own Ring of Fire, and an abundance of other extremely dangerous moves. This third phase has a massively different feel from the first, and as a whole, this is by far the most memorable boss of all. I think anyone from here to number 1 could arguably be better than the others. Number 5. The Dusk Veil. Chapter 4's secret area, Purple Cloud Mountain, is like a mini-scaled Chapter 6. Immediately after the Scorpion Lord, you chance upon the Dusk Veil, a dystopian amalgam of bones and flesh, born from the cocoon of the Blood Moon General right before your eyes. Though this is technically an optional fight, because he gives you the Weaver's Needle, this is as obligatory as anybody else. Luckily, he's an amazing boss that's incredibly challenging and has my favorite second phase in the game. I know Yaksha King and Great Sage's Broken Shell are higher than this, but to me, those are 2 separate bosses more than they are second phases, evidenced by them not reverting back to Red Boy or Stone Monkey if you die to them. I wouldn't know if Duskveil stays in his second phase anyways, because I didn't die, by the way. After you beat his simplistic newborn phase, he summons the Blood Moon and evolves. He has so many different combos and attacks in this second phase, and I like them all. And they still keep the general feel of the first phase, but amplify the volume of projectiles and the size of the AoEs to make it harder. I love this boss. Simple as. Number 4. Keeper of Flaming Mountains and Yin Yang Fish. Pussy-whipped though he may be, Keeper of Flaming Mountains can still put up a fight when called upon. The master of Yin and Yang has an incredible arena, and his moveset is really cool, swapping between Yin and Yang, but I feel like the elemental damage didn't work as intended. When Yin Yang Fish afflicted me, my damage went up significantly to the point where I was able to win in probably half the time it would have taken me otherwise. But before we get there, let's talk about the Keeper. He has a very active fight, constantly teleporting and launching both melee and projectiles towards you, and even summoning enemies from the lake. I thought this phase wasn't too challenging, but the consistent motion leveled it out. Yin Yang Fish is definitely my preferred of the two, because it's all action. I do like the breaks in combat in the Keeper's fight, but Yin Yang Fish basically takes all the good he does and improves upon it. As a whole, this fight is such a contrast from the Flaming Mountains in every way except its quality. It lives up to the standard of Wukong's endgame and deservedly earns its spot in the top 5. Number 3. Red Boy and Yaksha King. The bastard child of the Bull King makes for one hell of a final boss. Red Boy's story is a tragic tale of unwanted life and unloving nourishment, ultimately resulting in the horrifying abomination, both morally and physically, that is the creation of the Celestial Court, Red Boy. After slicing open a mortal wound on his father and holding the Flaming Mountains and all its resident Gwai captive in wait of Wukong's return, you finally come face to face with the most evil of all, at the heart of practically hell itself, at the climax of your journey. Red Boy is incredibly fast and finishes nearly every move with some form of blazing fire, which on its own deals about a quarter health plus the extra elemental damage. I'd compare Red Boy to a fight like Rilana or Ishin in his pure output, but also extreme fun. Sometimes a boss can feel a bit overboard, but Red Boy is pretty easily staggerable, such is the nature of Wukong's combat. Within this first fight, Red Boy has a second phase that greatly increases his difficulty, with projectiles and grander combos. All of his phase 2 moves are heavy, and I found myself focusing on surviving at times rather than trying to damage him. Once you defeat the child, his true self emerges when he absorbs Sun Wukong's 5th sense, mind. In the vein of the great Frank Fontaine, but thankfully not taking any inspiration from the boss fight, Red Boy struggles to suppress the sheer power of the Monkey King and transforms into the Lord of Demons, Hell, and Violence, the Yaksha King. Ju joins in to help you fight Yaksha King, but frankly, his aid is futile. Yaksha King has a ridiculous health pool, and though he's far less aggressive than Red Boy, also has some of the highest damage in the game. I nearly beat Red Boy and Yaksha King back to back, but died, and I was infuriated. To beat those two successively is pretty damn impressive if you've done it, because together, they're easily the most dangerous duo to face. Unless you have the Supreme Gourd, just having enough drinks for both fights would be a stretch, nonetheless the mental endurance required to make it that far. Anyways, Yaksha King's somewhat arduous movement and general drop-off in aggression compared to Red Boy forces a complete reset in approach, which I think was genius from the developers, intentional or not. He himself doesn't even evolve that much during his fight, but his sheer power is just terrifying. And the theme, oh my god, the theme. I haven't even mentioned it until now. It's so great. I'm also playing it as an underlay to this segment, so you probably get it. His arena-wide slice combo is absolutely horrifying, and surprisingly difficult to dodge, likely due to how delayed it feels. Though, once defeated, Yaksha King ends the fight the only way a creature of such pure violence would know how. In a final act of chaos, he puts his fist to his chin and releases his quill through his skull, committing suicide in front of his father. It's a metal finale to a metal fight, and I don't think they could have ended it any better. What an incredible boss, and I'm frankly shocked that the two ahead are as good as they are, because a fight of this quality would be a number one in almost every other game. Number 2. Erlang, the Sacred Divinity, the Four Heavenly Kings, and Erlang Shen. Choosing between these top two was essentially a coin toss. I went with Erlang at second because it was more enticing fighting Sun Wukong, or really just yourself. That said, after talking about it the whole video, I finally got my Asura's Wrath callback. I hope the DLC has a few more bosses like this one. At the very least, making a fight outside the mechanical confines of regular combat gives it unlimited creative freedom, and when done well, as in here, it automatically becomes one of the game's best moments. This benefits not only from the mechanic-breaking later phases, but also just simply one of the best individual bosses in the game in Erlang the Sacred Divinity. Supposedly, Erlang and Sun Wukong came to an agreement where the spearhead of the Celestial Court helped Wukong spread his relics, and it seems that once this task was fulfilled, he sat in meditation on Mount Mei, hoping for a worthy successor to rediscover and challenge him for a final, fair fight, not aided by the Heavenly Kings nor the Celestial Court. Once you defeat all the secret Yaoguai kings, you're able to access the final portrait in the Great Pagoda, leading you to the game's true ending. Atop the snowy Mount Mei sits Erlang, and the fight begins just as you left him on Mount Huaguo, but now with real stakes. I found a guide that recommended swapping the Weaver's Needle with the Plantain Fan, and it worked wonders. Erlang the Sacred Divinity is ridiculous with or without the fan, but the tornadoes help significantly in reducing, or rather removing, his posture meter. As it should be, this is the most testing boss in the game, and pushed me to my absolute limit with dodging. The first phase isn't particularly horrible, but his combos just last so long, not to mention he's got a few tricks up his sleeve like the axe attack. Once he gets to 50% health, the fight really gets crazy. He begins by releasing a clone, who both burst out lasers and cover the whole arena in seconds. The follow-up is a mega red lightning move, and there's no better time to use the fan than that. From there, he pulls out a barrage of some of the most epic attacks in the game until you defeat him, beginning a major cutscene. After chasing him through Mount Mei, Erlang tricks Wukong into releasing his final form, as he himself opens his third eye, becoming Erlang Shen. The size of mountains, Wukong and Erlang stare down, as Erlang says he's been excitedly waiting for the Monkey King's return. He then takes a back seat as the four Heavenly Kings step in to end the Great Sage. When I tell you I lost my mind realizing I was going to actually be able to play as Gongan Wukong would be an understatement. And not only that, but be able to do it against four of the most powerful gods in the Wukong universe. The Four Heavenly Kings is an amazing boss. It's a rush I haven't felt since I played Asura's Wrath 2 years ago, and I loved every second of it. The four kings share a single health bar, and each has unique abilities, but none are exceptionally advanced. Often, only 1 to 2 kings will aggro at a time, but they'll semi-regularly combine for a special move. I think something like this is what power fantasy should always aspire towards, climaxing by becoming a literal god, powerful enough to take on all the other gods is, at least to me, the pinnacle of a power fantasy. I still think Asura's Wrath is the best ever in this regard, not necessarily in a power fantasy's literal mechanical definition of character upgrades and in-game experience, but the simple act of being able to play as an omnipotent god, but this was pretty damn close. As you beat down on each king, their combined health will eventually get to a point where you start brutally massacring each one by one. I love the satisfaction of slowly depleting a larger group, not only the visceral reward of a merciless death scene, but also the fact that the fight itself becomes much easier as quantity depletes. After you kill the final Heavenly King, Erlang Shen re-emerges from the mountains and deems you worthy of a bout to the death. This last fight is just nuts. He's incredibly fun and also surprisingly dangerous at times. So dangerous, in fact, I died and it totally pissed on my parade. Anyways, I still had a great time and enjoyed the different elemental attacks you gain after beating the kings. After you take off a quarter of his health, Erlang reaches to the clouds and summons a flaming sword. This is where gets real. Like Yellowbrow, Erlang has multiple mid-fight cutscenes that really intensify the moment, but at the same time he is very beatable. As the final form of Wukong, I had some of the most fun I've had playing games in a long time, and I cannot wait to see what more Game Science has in store with the DLC. I beg them to make another fight, or even fights, like this, because from what I can tell, there's a lot more of the Celestial Court to go, and perhaps even the Jade Emperor himself. Number 1. Stone Monkey and the Great Sage's Broken Shell. This is Wukong's Gale, Wukong's Dante, Wukong's Armstrong. This is a boss of such caliber, I'd say it's among the greatest ever made. No exaggeration. After a beautiful 10-minute journey through the mind and memories of Sun Wukong, the voyage ends where it began, the Monkey King himself. As explained by the old man patrolling the realm of Wukong's stone, the Wukong you encounter at the end of his mind is his final creation before his death, a stone remnant designed to test and determine if his monkey heir is worthy of being his successor. A tall task indeed, but this boss lives up to it. But, for the last remnant of Sun Wukong, Stone Monkey is quite brutish. He moves slowly, even clumsily, has a slim health bar, and none of his attacks offer a major threat due to their general simplicity. He does have the big AoE, but overall, because of Jingabong and Wukong's armor set, you're too much to handle for the freshly woken gargoyle's first phase. The monkey enters a meditative state after being defeated and enters a new form of power. In this second phase, Stone Monkey obtains elemental control, utilizing electricity and ice. He gains a few new moves, but for the first half of this phase, it's just about the same as before. It's only when he clones himself that it gets serious. Similar to Cloudy Mist, Misty Cloud, a clone of Stone Monkey spawns in to form large combos with its originator. I'm not sure if it's based on a timer or if it's damage, but after a certain point, the clone will disappear and revert the fight back to a 1v1. Stone Monkey finishes with a minute-long Wild Flurry, leading to a second cutscene. After a stalemate, the Destined One uses Wukong's most feared ability, Pluck of Many, to finish the creator forever. But suddenly, Stone Monkey disintegrates into a ball of energy, taking the form of Sun Wukong himself. Reigniting Jingabong and brandishing the armor worn to overthrow the Celestial Court, Wukong rushes the Destined One, beginning the Great Sage's Broken Shell. Stone Monkey is a pretty cool boss, but this is the meat of the encounter. Immediately, the Sage's Shell makes a point of putting you on the defensive. In an equally gratifying yet terrifying proposition, he is identical to you. You have achieved the level of Sun Wukong, but now have to beat yourself, which is far easier said than done. The Great Sage's Broken Shell is absolutely bonkers, making use of every single ability, weapon art, and combo you've learned to love over the course of your journey. I often feel like these type of fights fall short of the stick by focusing too heavily on the moment sentimentally, rather than the actual metrics of the fight itself. This achieves a perfect medium by clearly emphasizing the weight of the moment through cutscenes and interwoven sequences, but also by being simply a challenging fight. I appreciate how Great Sage's Broken Shell forced me to think outside the box. How would I fight myself? Maybe more importantly, What would the other me do when trying to beat me? How can I trick myself into losing to myself, essentially? These are all questions that do actually play out in this boss. Much like Stone Monkey, the Great Sage's Broken Shell's first phase is fairly easy. A 4 focus point heavy attack can do a quarter of his health, and at least comparatively to phase 2, he doesn't do that much. That's not to say he's primitive, however. The Sage's first phase used Ring of Fire, Pluck of Many, heavy attacks, perfect dodges, and more, all in the span of about a minute. Though frankly, phase 2 makes the first look like child's play, not only with his more complete moveset, but his general increase in speed, aggression, teleportation, and length of attacks. Phase 2 begins with my favorite boss cutscene in the game, a mirror duel in the mind of Sun Wukong. After besting the Destined One, Wukong saps all of his power, marking his true return to final form, at least in ability. Even weakened, you must continue, and to continue, you have to beat the most powerful and dangerous foe yet. Though, in appearance, this is the Great Sage's Broken Shell, in Phase 2, you are essentially fighting an unblemished Sun Wukong. This second phase is an extremely amped up version of its predecessor, with no strings attached. He uses everything in his arsenal, even the likes of the Flying Nimbus and different combat forms. Oh, and immobilize. If you drink a gourd while Wukong is dodging or even standing still, there's about a 50-50 chance he will freeze you mid-sip, take your gourd, and recover some of his own health using one of your drinks. It's such an amazing moment that manages to punish you for lack of skill, show off Wukong's incredible power, and be just incredibly awesome. There are a few more mini cutscenes throughout, but overall the actual combat is so fluid and is such a thrill. The Great Sage's Broken Shell tests your mental endurance like no other, is incomparably rewarding, and is, for me, not just a testament to the incredible quality of fights in Black Myth Wukong, but is one of the greatest bosses ever made. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. I honestly feel like a better way to rank these bosses would have been a tier list or even scoring them individually. As I said in the intro, this ranking was practically arbitrary from like number 20 onwards, barring a few obvious ones that were a bit worse or better than the rest. So I hope you all just enjoyed the commentary if anything. Remember to like and subscribe if you haven't, and be sure to check out our Patreon, linked in the description below. That's all for now. Deuces.